My name is Alara Finch, and for most of my life, I believed strength meant silence. I was 35 years old, a pediatric intensive care physician, and the mother of 4-year-old twins who thought I could fix anything: scraped knees, nightmares, broken toys. I let them believe that. It was easier than admitting that sometimes, even doctors are powerless. The night everything unraveled began like any other exhausted Tuesday. I'd worked 14 hours straight, charting notes with one hand while sipping burnt hospital coffee with the other. My body felt heavy, but my mind was alert enough to know I needed to get home. The twins would be asleep by now, tucked in by the sitter who charged extra for late hours. I never made it home. The intersection near Maple and Grant had always been poorly lit. I slowed as the light turned green, my foot hovering over the accelerator out of habit more than caution. I remember thinking about tomorrow's schedule: 2 admissions, 1 discharge, and a meeting I didn't want to attend. Then came the sound: metal screaming, glass exploding, the violent lurch of my body sideways. I didn't feel pain at first, just pressure. Crushing, suffocating pressure that stole the air from my lungs. The world spun, light smearing into darkness. When I opened my eyes again, a ceiling rushed past me. Fluorescent, too bright. "Ilara, Ilara, stay with me." I recognized the voice before I saw the face. Dr. Nolan Reeves, trauma attending, jogging beside the gurney as it was wheeled through ambulance bay doors. "You were hit broadside," he said quickly. "Vitals are unstable. We're concerned about internal bleeding." Internal bleeding. The words settled slowly, like a verdict being read in a language I half understood. "My kids," I whispered. My throat burned. "The twins. They're at home." Nolan's eyes flicked to the clock mounted above the bay doors. "What time does your sitter leave?" "8. It's 7:20. 40 minutes. I tried to sit up. Pain ripped through my abdomen, sharp and immediate, forcing a cry from my chest. "Ilara," Nolan said firmly, pressing me back down. "Don't move." "I need my phone." A nurse placed it in my shaking hand. The screen was smeared with blood I didn't remember earning. My fingers fumbled as I pulled up the contact I hadn't called for help in years. Mom and Dad. The phone rang. Once. Twice. They picked up on the 4th ring. "What is it?" my father asked, irritation bleeding into every syllable. Music played faintly in the background. Laughter, clinking glasses. "Dad," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've been in an accident. I'm at the hospital. They're taking me to surgery." Silence. Then muffled voices. My mother, someone else. A familiar high-pitched laugh that made my chest tighten. "Dad," I returned. "We're on our way out. This isn't a good time." "I just need you to watch the twins," I said quickly. "Just for a few hours, please. The sitter's leaving." Another pause. Longer this time. My phone buzzed. Not a call. A message. Our family group chat. "Mom, you've always been dramatic. We have plans tonight. Don't turn this into a crisis." My breath hitched. Another message followed almost immediately. "Dad, you're a doctor. You know hospitals. Handle it." Then finally, a reaction emoji appeared beneath the messages. A laughing face. From my sister. I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again, waiting for them to change, for context, for a follow-up, for anything that suggested this was a misunderstanding. Nothing came. Nolan was watching me. I hadn't realized my hands were shaking until he gently took the phone from my grip. "Ilara," he said carefully, "do you have anyone else you can call?" I swallowed hard. "No." He didn't ask questions, just nodded once and handed me his phone. "Emergency Child Care Services. I'll stand by." I made the call like I was ordering supplies. Calm, clinical, detached. Yes, twins. Yes, immediately. Yes, I'd pay whatever was required. When it was done, I handed the phone back. "Thank you," I said. He hesitated. "Do you want me to document the messages?" I met his eyes. Please. The pain worsened as they wheeled me towards surgery, but it wasn't what hurt most. That came later, lying alone under thin hospital blankets, listening to machines beep steadily while the truth settled into my bones. I had been bleeding internally while my parents laughed over dinner plans. I had been paying their bills for years while being told I was too much. I had nearly died, and they hadn't come. 3 days passed, then 4. No calls, no texts, no visits. The nanny service sent daily photos of my children smiling, safe, unaware of how close they'd come to losing their mother. Strangers showed up when my own family wouldn't. On the 5th day, I asked for my laptop. I logged into my bank account. The transfers were there, just like always, monthly, automatic, reliable. Then I canceled every single one. Then I blocked 3 phone numbers. There were no tears, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet certainty settling over me like a long overdue diagnosis. Some relationships don't break in explosions. Some end the moment you realize you are never meant to survive them. And that was only the beginning. Growing up in the Finch household, affection was never denied outright. It was rationed, measured, earned. From as far back as I could remember, love came with invisible tallies that only my parents seemed able to see. Praise was handed out selectively, like a reward for hitting an unspoken standard. I learned early that I rarely met it. My older sister, Maribel, did. Maribel was 2.5 years ahead of me, which might as well have been a lifetime. She had the kind of presence that bent rooms toward her. Easy laughter, flawless hair, a way of speaking that made people lean in. When she entered a space, my parents straightened without realizing it. Their voices softened, their eyes lit up. I became the background noise to her melody. When Maribel decided she wanted to pursue visual arts, my mother framed her first sketch and hung it in the hallway like a museum piece. When she won a regional design competition at 17, my father threw a dinner party and invited half the neighborhood. When I told them I wanted to go to medical school, my father nodded once and said, "That's sensible." Sensible. Not impressive, not inspiring, just practical. I learned to clap quietly, to sit politely, to never ask why her milestones came with celebrations while mine passed with polite acknowledgments. At 13, Maribel wrecked my bike and cried about it. I was grounded for leaving it outside. At 16, she failed 2 classes and was going through a phase. I brought home straight A's and was told not to brag. By college, the pattern had solidified into something immovable. Maribel needed support. I needed to be independent. Maribel was sensitive. I was resilient. Resilient became the word they used whenever I asked for something. When I moved out at 18, my mother hugged Maribel and slipped her grocery money just in case. I loaded my own boxes and drove away with a single tank of gas and a reminder to budget carefully. I didn't complain. I studied. I worked. I learned how to survive without applause. Medical school was brutal but honest. Exams didn't care who your parents favored. Patients didn't care if you were overlooked at home. Competence mattered. Effort mattered. For the first time, the rules were clear. I thrived. The night I was accepted into my residency program, I called home. My mother sounded distracted. "That's wonderful, Laura," she said. "Hold on a moment." She put me on hold to take another call. Maribel, apparently, had just landed an internship with a designer in Milan. When my graduation day arrived years later, my parents showed up late, they stayed for photos, they left before dinner. Maribel had a gallery showing that evening. She needed them more. I told myself it didn't hurt. That lie carried me into adulthood. The financial support started subtly, the way manipulation often does. My father called one evening, voice heavy with embarrassment. "We're just short this month," he said, "just until things stabilize." I transferred the money without hesitation. They were my parents. Of course I helped. Then came another call. Then another. The requests grew specific. Mortgage, insurance, repairs. emergencies. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they'd do the same for me. They never did. When I found out I was pregnant, with twins no less, their father vanished before the second trimester ended. I called my parents from a hospital bed after a complication sent me in for monitoring. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I could really use you." My mother sighed. "Oh, honey, we wish we could come, but Maribel's under so much pressure right now. You understand." I did. I always did. The twins were born during finals week of my fellowship year. I slept in 90-minute increments, studied with one baby on my chest and the other in a bassinet beside me. I passed my boards. I paid the bills. My parents sent congratulations cards. No visits, no offers to help, but the money left my account every month right on time. I kept records, not out of bitterness, I told myself, but organization, dates, amounts, notes, a quiet ledger of sacrifice I never intended to show anyone. Until the accident, until the text message, until the laughing emoji burned itself into my memory. Lying in that hospital bed, I replayed moments I'd buried for years, the times I'd apologized for needing help, the way my parents spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. "Alara can handle it, she always does." I finally understood what that meant. They didn't see me as strong, they saw me as convenient. When I was discharged, the twins ran into my arms like nothing had changed. Their trust broke something open inside me. I looked at them and knew with absolute clarity that I would never teach them love was something to be earned by suffering quietly. That night, as they slept, I opened my old spreadsheet. Years of giving, years of silence. I didn't feel anger. I felt resolve. Some families survive because one person carries everyone else. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to finally put the weight down. 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my door. And standing on the other side was someone my parents had spent years keeping at a distance. Someone who had been watching far more closely than I ever realized. The knock came just after 9 on a Saturday morning. I'd been moving slowly that day, still sore, still healing. The twins were at the kitchen table, arguing over whose turn it was to stir the pancake batter. The smell of butter and coffee filled the air. Ordinary, comforting, fragile. I wiped my hands on a towel and checked the peephole. For a moment, my breath caught. A tall man stood on my porch, straight-backed despite his age. His silver hair was neatly combed, his coat buttoned against the autumn chill. I hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years, but I would have recognized him anywhere. Arthur Finch, my grandfather. The man my parents always said was too difficult, too judgmental, too old-fashioned to visit often. I opened the door. "Alara," he said, voice rough with emotion. "There you are." He didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled me into a careful but fierce hug, one arm solid around my shoulders. I hissed softly as my incision protested, and he immediately loosened his grip. "Sorry," he said. "I forget you're not made of iron." I laughed, despite myself. "Come in." He stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room, not critically, but attentively. The twins stared at him like he was a storybook character come to life. "Who's that?" Leo whispered to Isla. "Good morning," Arthur said, kneeling with surprising ease. "I'm your great-grandfather." That was all it took. Within minutes, he was being shown stuffed animals, toy cars, and a crooked crayon masterpiece taped to the fridge. He gave them his full attention, nodding solemnly as if every detail mattered. I set coffee mugs on the table and sat across from him once the twins had retreated to their toys. "How did you find out?" I asked quietly. He folded his hands. "Eleanor called me the night it happened." My aunt, my mother's younger sister, the only one who ever questioned the family narrative. She told me everything about the accident, the messages, the money. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to cause a rift. Arthur's eyes sharpened. "You didn't. You survived one." He took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down carefully. I've watched your parents for years. The way they orbit Maribel, the way they treat you like a resource instead of a daughter. I stared at my hands. I thought maybe I was imagining it. You weren't, he said simply. I spent 42 years in arbitration and civil mediation. People lie, Alara, but patterns don't. Silence settled between us. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I'm hosting my 75th birthday next Saturday. The whole family will be there. I didn't like the way my pulse spiked. Why are you telling me this? Because, Keme, he said calmly, it's time the truth stops being whispered. I hesitated. I don't want to humiliate anyone. Arthur met my gaze. Facts aren't humiliation, they're accountability. He stood and adjusted his coat. I'd like you to come. Bring the children. After he left, I sat at the table long after the coffee went cold. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt seen. The days leading up to the party were heavy with unease. Cousins I barely spoke to suddenly texted. Distant relatives reached out under the guise of concern. Heard you've been going through a rough patch. Your parents are worried about you. Maribel says you've been acting distant since the accident. I didn't respond. Eleanor stopped by midweek, sharp-eyed and unflinching as always. They're laying groundwork, she said, after flipping through the binder of records I'd prepared, painting you as unstable. I exhaled slowly. I don't want a war. You're not starting one, she replied. You're ending a long con. She closed the binder. Do you know how much this is? I do. She shook her head. They called you a burden. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the twins' soft breathing through the baby monitor. What if everyone believed them? What if I lost the rest of my family too? But when morning came, I dressed carefully. Navy dress, flat shoes. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't there to perform. Arthur's house sat on a quiet stretch of land, white columns framed by ancient oak trees. Cars lined the drive. Laughter spilled from the open doors. Inside, the atmosphere was polished and warm. String music, champagne flutes, polite smiles. I saw them immediately. My parents stood near the fireplace. My mother's smile froze when she spotted me. My father's jaw tightened. Maribel approached first, gliding toward me like nothing had changed. Ilara, she said, air kissing my cheek. We were worried. Mom said your accident wasn't that serious. I met her eyes. I almost died. Her smile flickered. Oh, well, you look fine now. I turned away before she could say more. 30 minutes into the party, the murmurs began. Maribel's voice carried across the room, honeyed with concern. She's been so sensitive lately. The accident really rattled her. My mother dabbed her eyes. We've tried reaching out. She won't let us help. I felt the familiar urge to disappear. Then Arthur stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'd like to say something, he announced. The room stilled. My father stepped forward. Dad, maybe this isn't the... It is, Arthur interrupted calmly. Richard, who has been paying your mortgage for the last 8 years? The silence was absolute. Faces turned. My father stammered. My mother went pale. Arthur opened the folder, and the truth, patient and precise, finally had a voice. Arthur Finch didn't rush. That was the most terrifying part. He stood at the center of the room with the calm certainty of a man who had spent decades resolving conflicts by refusing to be intimidated by noise or emotion. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Even the musicians in the corner lowered their instruments, sensing the shift. Richard, Arthur repeated evenly. It was a simple question. My father cleared his throat. Dad, I don't see how this is relevant. Arthur opened the folder. I do. He removed the first sheet and held it up. Not for show, but so the people nearest could see the heading. 8 years ago, he said, Ilara began transferring funds from her personal account to yours, monthly, consistently. A ripple moved through the room. My mother's lips parted. This is a misunderstanding. Arthur nodded. Then this should be easy to clarify. He adjusted his glasses and read. Mortgage payments, $2,400 every month for 96 months. Someone near the back gasped. An aunt whispered, that's nearly $200,000. Arthur continued. Health insurance premiums after Richard's employer dropped coverage. Car repairs, home maintenance, emergency transfers. He flipped a page. Support for Maribel's design ventures, he added, not looking up. $12,000. Maribel's face drained of color. I felt the weight of every year press into my chest as the numbers stacked up, undeniable and exact. This wasn't emotion. This wasn't interpretation. This was arithmetic. Total, Arthur said, closing the folder, approximately $360,000. The room erupted. That can't be right. Is that true? She paid all that? My father's hands clenched. She offered. We never asked. Arthur tilted his head. Did you thank her? Silence. Did you visit her when she was hospitalized during her pregnancy? Nothing. Did you show up when her twins were born? My mother let out a soft sob. We thought she was managing, my father said weakly. Arthur's voice hardened for the first time. She managed because you taught her that her needs were inconvenient. Someone muttered, Jesus. Then Arthur did something none of us expected. He took out his phone. 2 months ago, he said, Ilara was in a collision, internal bleeding, emergency surgery. He paused, letting that land. She called her parents from the ambulance. Her children were home with a sitter who was about to leave. My mother shook her head. That's not. Arthur raised a hand. I'll read the response she received. He read the message aloud, word for word. The room fell apart. That's cruel, someone said sharply. You said that? Over dinner plans? My sister stepped forward, voice brittle. You're twisting it. It was a misunderstanding. Arthur looked at her. Did you laugh? Maribel's mouth opened, closed. My father shouted, We didn't know it was serious. Arthur's reply was quiet. Did you ask? Silence answered for him. My mother was crying openly now, not the delicate tears she used to gain sympathy, but raw, uncontrolled sobs. I didn't mean it like that, she whispered. Arthur turned to the room. Intent doesn't erase impact. Then he looked at me. Ilara, he said gently, do you wish to say anything? I hadn't planned to, but suddenly I needed to. I stepped forward, handing Isla to Eleanor, and felt every eye settle on me. I didn't come here to shame anyone, my voice trembled, but it didn't break. I came because for most of my life, I believed being useful was the same as being loved. I looked at my parents. When you told me Maribel needed more support, I believed you. When you said I could handle things on my own, I believed you. I thought that was what strength looked like. A tear slid down my cheek. But that night in the ambulance, bleeding and terrified, I realized something. I wasn't strong to you. I was convenient. My father tried to speak. I shook my head. I don't hate you, but I can't keep pretending this was okay. An uncle near the window muttered, She's right. So what now? Are you happy? You've embarrassed us. I met his gaze. This isn't about embarrassment. It's about honesty. I took a breath. I've stopped the financial support, not out of anger, but because love shouldn't be transactional. The room shifted again. My mother reached for me. I stepped back. I'm not closing the door forever, but I need real accountability, not excuses, not rewrites. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. That, he said, is all anyone can ask. One by one, people stepped away from my parents. No shouting, no declarations, just distance. They left early. No one stopped them. The quiet they left behind wasn't awkward. It was clarifying. The party didn't end when my parents left. If anything, that's when it truly began. The tension that had filled the room slowly dissolved into quiet conversations. Low voices, hesitant questions, the soft clink of glasses being set down untouched. No one rushed to comfort my parents. No one chased after them. That absence spoke louder than anything said out loud. Eleanor returned Isla to my arms, brushing her thumb gently along my daughter's back. "You did well," she murmured. I nodded, though my knees still felt unsteady. Arthur didn't gloat. He didn't linger in the spotlight. Instead, he redirected attention with practiced grace, inviting people to eat, to talk, to breathe. The musicians resumed, softer this time. Life continued, not because nothing had happened, but because something important finally had. Several relatives approached me in turns. "I had no idea," a cousin said, I sincere. "You didn't deserve that," an aunt added. "If you need anything at all," another offered. I thanked them, accepting the words without clinging to them. I'd learned the danger of mistaking sympathy for commitment. Maribel was the only one who didn't speak to me again that night. She stayed near the back, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching as if I'd taken something from her. Maybe I had. The drive home was quiet. The twins fell asleep in their car seats, exhausted by excitement and sugar. Streetlights passed in a steady rhythm, and for the first time since the accident, my chest felt light. Not healed, but lighter. The reckoning didn't take long to arrive. 3 days later, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring. Then my father. Then Maribel. Voicemail followed voicemail. "Ilara, this is getting out of hand. We need to talk like adults. You let Grandpa humiliate us." I listened to none of them all the way through. Instead, I drafted a single message. "I'm open to a conversation with a mediator present. I'm not interested in denial, blame, or rewriting events. Let me know if you're willing." I sent it. The response was immediate. My father accused me of betrayal. My mother cried. Maribel sent a 3-page message explaining how much pressure she'd been under, how she'd never asked for my help, how the laughter was nervous, not cruel. I didn't reply. The financial consequences hit next. The mortgage payment bounced, their insurance lapsed, a credit card maxed out. Suddenly, the family who had praised Maribel's independence and dismissed my sacrifices discovered the cost of assuming one person would always fill the gaps. Arthur called me one evening as I tucked the twins into bed. "They're asking me to intervene," he said. I stiffened. "Are you going to?" "No, unless they ask you first." Relief washed through me. "You don't owe them, but if you ever choose to help again, it should be from a place of choice, not obligation." The twins adjusted quickly to the new normal. Children always do. They didn't miss grandparents who had rarely visited. They didn't feel the absence of an aunt who'd never learned their favorite colors. They did notice something else. I laughed more. I slept better. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Maribel. She didn't mention the money. She wrote about how she'd always felt watched, compared, pressured to perform, how being the golden child wasn't as effortless as it looked. I didn't realize how much of my comfort came from your silence, she wrote. I read it twice. Then I folded it and set it aside. Understanding didn't equal accountability. Not yet. At work, Nolan pulled me aside after rounds. You look different, he said. Good different or bad? Grounded, he replied. Like you finally stopped bracing for impact. I smiled. I think I did. The last call came on a Sunday evening. Unknown number. I answered. Ilara, my mother said, voice thin and shaky. We can't manage like this. I closed my eyes. This isn't about managing. It's about acknowledging what happened. We raised you. You owe us. No, I interrupted, surprised by my own steadiness. You chose to have me. I chose to help. Those are different things. Silence followed. Then a small broken sound I'd never heard from her before. What do you want? She asked. I thought of my children asleep down the hall, of the hospital ceiling rushing past, of Arthur standing tall in a room full of lies. I want honesty, I said, and I want change. If that's not possible, then distance will have to be. The line went dead. I didn't cry. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the quiet neighborhood settle into night. For the first time, I understood something deeply. Setting boundaries doesn't break families. It reveals them. And once revealed, there's no unseeing what was always there. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the quiet. When you spend your entire life responding, fixing, smoothing, compensating, the sudden absence of demands feels unnatural. For weeks after the confrontation, my phone stayed mostly silent. No urgent calls, no financial emergencies, no subtle reminders of what I should be doing. At first, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. Instead, something else happened. I started noticing how much space I'd been occupying for other people and how little I'd left for myself. Mornings became slower. I made real breakfasts instead of grabbing protein bars between alarms. I walked the twins to preschool when my schedule allowed, holding their hands, listening to their stories about imaginary dragons and playground politics. They noticed, too. "Mummy," Ela said one afternoon, "you don't look tired anymore." I laughed softly. I still get tired. "But not the sad kind," she replied. That night, I cried. Not from grief, but from relief. At work, the shift was just as noticeable. Without the constant emotional drain, I found myself more present with my patients. I stayed after rounds to explain procedures to anxious parents. I volunteered to mentor a new resident who reminded me of myself, capable, quiet, and constantly minimizing her own needs. Don't confuse endurance with obligation, I told her once. The words surprised me as much as they did her. Arthur checked in weekly, never intrusive, always steady. You don't need to prove anything now, he said during one call. Just live well. The first real test came in the form of a hospital fundraiser. Maribel's name appeared on the guest list. So did my parents. I considered not going. Then I realized I no longer needed to avoid rooms where they existed. The night of the event, I arrived alone. No armor, no script. Maribel spotted me first. She hesitated before approaching, her confidence dulled. She said, "You look different." I replied, "People keep saying that." She nodded, fingers twisting nervously around her clutch. I didn't know how to be without their approval. I guess I still don't. I studied her carefully. For the first time, I saw the cracks beneath the polish. "That's not my problem anymore," I said gently. "But I hope you figure it out." She swallowed. They're struggling. I know. You could help. I met her eyes. I am helping by not enabling. She looked away. My parents kept their distance all evening. Later, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. She was always the responsible one, my father said quietly to someone near the bar. We thought she didn't need us. The person replied, needing and deserving aren't the same thing. I left early, heart steady. Weeks passed. Then came the email. Subject line, mediation request. They had agreed. The mediator was neutral, thorough, and mercilessly fair. For 2 hours, my parents spoke in circles, minimizing, reframing, defending. Then the mediator turned to them and asked one question. Why was financial support expected, but emotional support optional? Neither had an answer. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. At the end of the session, my mother reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back. We need time, she said. So do I. The twins learned a new word that month. Boundary. It became a game. Ela, what's a boundary? Something that keeps you safe, Leo added, and happy. I smiled every time. Not all consequences were quiet. Maribel lost funding for her latest project when my parents couldn't contribute. She blamed me, then the system, then herself. Growth isn't linear. One evening, as I balanced checkbooks and calendars, I noticed something startling. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of being cut off. I had already done the cutting and survived. Arthur came to dinner the following Sunday. He watched the twins chase each other around the living room, laughter echoing off the walls. You've changed the pattern, he said. Have I? I asked. He nodded. They'll never have to earn love by being useful. That night, after everyone was asleep, I stood in the doorway of the twins' room and understood something that took decades to learn. You don't need permission to stop bleeding for people who refuse to see the wound. Silence, I learned, has layers. At first, it's unsettling, an echo where noise used to be. Then it becomes spacious. And finally, if you let it, it turns into clarity. By early winter, the world had slowed. The trees outside my house stood bare and honest, branches stripped of pretense. I found comfort in that. There was no performance left in my life, only what remained after truth had done its work. The mediator sent a follow-up summary of our session. Objective, factual, unforgiving. My parents didn't contest it. That alone told me more than any apology could have. Maribel, however, unraveled. She called late one night, voice brittle and sharp. I almost didn't answer. I don't know who I am without them, she admitted, without being the one they protect. I closed my eyes. That was never my role to carry for you. I know, she said. I just didn't know what it cost you. We sat in that understanding, heavy but honest. I'm not asking for money, she added quickly. I don't want to lose you too. I chose my words carefully. I'm not gone, I said, but I can't be your safety net anymore. I can be your sister if you let me be. She exhaled shakily. I don't know how. Neither do I replied. But we can learn separately. That was the first conversation we'd ever had that didn't revolve around managing our parents' expectations. At the hospital, change arrived quietly. The resident I'd been mentoring, Jasmine, pulled me aside one afternoon. I turned down an extra rotation, she said, bracing herself. I would have said yes before. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I smiled. How does it feel? Terrifying, she said. And right. That word stayed with me. Right. Arthur's health declined subtly. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way age eventually insists upon being acknowledged. He moved slower, forgot small things, still sharp as ever, but mortal. We started having weekly dinners, just the three of us, when Eleanor couldn't join. "I've given me peace," he said once, watching the twins color. "That's no small thing." I shook my head. "You gave me permission to stop pretending." He smiled. "You never needed it, but sometimes it helps to hear it from someone who sees you clearly." The twins asked about their grandparents. "Why don't we see them?" Leo asked one evening, matter of fact. I crouched in front of him. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people. We're giving them space to fix those choices." "Will they?" Isla asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But our job isn't to wait." They accepted that easily. Children understand fairness better than adults. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a check. Not small, not nearly enough to cover everything, but significant. Attached was a note in my mother's handwriting. "We're trying to make things right. We don't know how yet." I stared at the check for a long time. Then I mailed it back. No note, no explanation, just the message that money without accountability was no longer currency I accepted. The fallout was swift. My father accused me of cruelty. My mother accused me of punishment. Arthur said nothing, until my father called him. "I raised her better than this," my father complained. Arthur replied calmly, "You raised her to survive. She taught herself how to live." The fundraiser gala photos surfaced online a few days later. I scrolled past images of myself smiling, composed, unbroken. For years, I'd thought strength meant endurance. Now, I understood it meant choice. Winter deepened, snow fell, and then, unexpectedly, my mother showed up. No call, no warning, just standing on my porch, hands clenched in her coat sleeves. "I'm not here to argue," she said before I could speak. "I'm here because I don't know who I am without you fixing things." I studied her carefully. "Then it's time you find out," I said. She cried. I didn't rescue her. She left an hour later, calmer, quieter, uncertain. And for the first time, that uncertainty belonged to her, not me. Change doesn't arrive with apologies. It arrives with discomfort. By the time spring edged its way back into the city, my parents had begun to experience something unfamiliar. The absence of a safety net they hadn't even realized was custom built for them. Bills went unpaid longer, plans were canceled, social invitations thinned. Not because they were being punished, but because the illusion they'd been living under no longer held. My mother started therapy. I found out through Eleanor, not through her. "She didn't mention you at first," Eleanor said during one of our coffee walks. "Just kept talking about feeling abandoned." The therapist asked her who she'd abandoned. That question apparently landed hard. My father struggled more. He'd built his identity on being the provider, the authority, the one who had everything under control. Losing that narrative left him restless and irritable. According to Arthur, he cycled through anger, denial, self-pity, and finally, something resembling reflection. Maribel moved out of their house. She took a small studio across town and started teaching evening classes to supplement her income. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't curated, but it was hers. She sent me a photo one afternoon. Paint-splattered hands, a tired smile. "First honest paycheck," the caption read. I replied with a single word: proud. That was enough. The first real olive branch came not with words, but with action. My parents asked Arthur for help, not financial, but logistical. Budgeting, downsizing, planning. Arthur agreed on one condition. They speak to Alara only in invited. They accepted. That told me everything I needed to know. The invitation came weeks later, a simple email. We would like to apologize. No expectations, no requests. We understand if you say no. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with the message for days, weighing not forgiveness, but capacity. When I finally replied, I suggested a public place. Coffee. 1 hour. They arrived early. They looked smaller. My mother spoke first. "We failed you," she said, voice steady but soft. Not once, repeatedly. My father didn't interrupt. "We justified it. We told ourselves you didn't need us because it made our neglect easier to live with." My hands trembled slightly around my cup. "I'm not here to erase the past. I'm here to see if the future can be different." My father nodded slowly. "I didn't see you," he admitted. "Not really. I saw what you provided." Silence followed. Not empty. Earned. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for access to the twins. They asked what accountability looked like. I told them. Therapy, financial independence, no triangulation through Maribel, no rewriting events. They agreed. I believed them, not blindly, but cautiously. Trust, I'd learned, is rebuilt through consistency, not emotion. The twins met their grandparents again weeks later in a park. Short visit, supervised, neutral ground. My parents were awkward but attentive. They listened more than they spoke. Isla tugged my sleeve halfway through. "They're being nice," she whispered. "They're trying," I corrected gently. That distinction mattered. Arthur watched from a distance, content. You didn't collapse your boundaries, you widened them carefully. At work, I took a sabbatical. 6 weeks. I traveled with the twins, nothing extravagant. Cabins, trains, quiet mornings without schedules. We talked about choices, about listening to our bodies, about saying no without guilt. One night, by a fireplace, Leo asked, "Will we ever have to fix people?" I smiled sadly. No, only ourselves. By the time summer arrived, the dynamic had shifted permanently. Not perfect, but honest. My parents no longer expected, Maribel no longer competed, and I no longer explained. The final piece fell into place quietly, the way the most important truths often do. I realized I wasn't waiting for validation anymore. I already had it. Some endings don't announce themselves. They arrive slowly, like a season changing while you're busy living. By autumn, the sharp edges of the past had softened, not because they were forgotten, but because they no longer controlled the present. My parents kept their commitments. Therapy appointments stayed on the calendar. Bills were handled without my involvement. Conversations, when they happened, were careful and respectful. Not warm, but real. Maribel found her footing. She struggled, adjusted, failed, and tried again. She learned how to sit with discomfort without demanding someone else absorb it. Our relationship remained cautious but honest, built on equal ground for the first time. One afternoon, she admitted something I'd never expected to hear. "I was afraid of you," she said quietly. I looked up from the table between us. "Why?" "Because you kept going, no matter how little you got back. I thought if I acknowledged your strength, I'd have to face my dependence." I nodded slowly. Strength isn't silent endurance, it's knowing when to stop. She smiled faintly. "I'm still learning." Arthur's health declined more noticeably that fall. Nothing urgent, just the steady progression of time. He tired easily, his memory slipped around the edges, but his mind remained sharp, his observations precise. We talked often about legacy. "People think it's about what you leave behind," he said once, watching the twins rake leaves. "But it's really about what you stop passing down." The twins adored him. They didn't know the version of family I'd grown up with. They knew something gentler, safer. One evening, as we sorted old photographs together, Arthur handed me a faded picture. My parents, young, smiling, holding Maribel as a baby. They weren't always unkind, he said. I know, but kindness that depends on convenience isn't enough. He nodded. You broke the cycle. At the hospital, Jasmine completed her residency and accepted a position she wanted, not one she felt pressured into. She hugged me on her last day. You changed how I see success. It's not about approval anymore. I understood that. The final family gathering came unexpectedly. Arthur asked for it. Small, intentional, no speeches, just dinner. My parents arrived humbled. Maribel arrived quiet. Eleanor brought dessert. The twins set the table with mismatched napkins and enormous pride. There were no apologies, no accusations, only presence. After dinner, Arthur raised his glass. To Ilara, he said, for choosing truth over comfort. My father met my eyes. Thank you, he said simply. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Later that night, as I tucked the twins into bed, Isla asked, Are we a good family? I kissed her forehead. We're an honest one. She smiled, satisfied. Arthur passed away peacefully 3 months later. No drama, no unfinished business. At his memorial, people spoke of his fairness, his integrity, his quiet courage. I spoke of gratitude, not for what he'd given me, but for what he'd helped me see. Afterward, my mother hugged me. Not tightly, not possessively, just present. I see you, she whispered. I believed her. The house felt full that evening. Not crowded, rooted. And for the first time, I understood what healing actually looked like. Not reunion, not revenge, just alignment. Grief doesn't always arrive as devastation. Sometimes it arrives as stillness. After Arthur's memorial, the house settled into a new rhythm, one shaped not by loss, but by the absence of old tension. There were no unspoken debts, no expectations hovering at the edges of conversations. What remained was quieter, sturdier, real. My parents didn't retreat after Arthur's death. They didn't advance either. They stayed where they were, learning, awkwardly, how to exist without leaning on me. That restraint mattered more than grand gestures ever could. My mother sent postcards instead of advice. My father asked questions and listened to the answers. Once, during a walk with the twins, my mother stopped and said, I used to think love meant involvement. I waited. Now I think it means respect, she finished. I nodded. That's closer. At work, I declined a promotion that would have doubled my administrative load and halved my time with patients. Old me would have said yes out of obligation. This time, I didn't. Instead, I transitioned into a teaching role, half clinical, half mentorship. I watched young doctors learn not just medicine, but boundaries. Competence doesn't require self-erasure, I told them, and compassion doesn't mean martyrdom. Those words felt like inheritance, passed forward. Maribel came over one evening carrying a small box. She said, I found these in storage. Inside were old letters, photos, things I'd written her as a child, drawings, clumsy notes, promises that we'd always be friends. I don't remember deserving this, she said quietly. You didn't need to. I chose it. She swallowed. I want to choose better now. I believed her, not because of her words, but because of her actions. The twins grew. They asked better questions. They set boundaries instinctively, the way children do when they're taught that love doesn't disappear when they say no. One afternoon, Leo refused to hug a relative goodbye. That's okay, I said calmly. The relative looked surprised, but complied. Later, Isla whispered, "You didn't make him." I smiled. "No one has to give affection they don't want to." She considered this, then nodded solemnly, as if filing it away for later life. That night, after the house fell quiet, I sat on the porch and thought about the woman I'd been. The one who mistook endurance for virtue. The one who believed being needed was the same as being valued. I didn't feel anger towards her, only gratitude. She had carried me this far, but she didn't need to carry anything anymore. On the anniversary of the accident, I returned to the intersection. Not out of fear, out of acknowledgement. I stood there briefly, then walked away. Whole. Healing is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with milestones or grand declarations. It shows up in small, almost forgettable moments, moments you only recognize as important once they've already passed. It showed up for me on a Tuesday afternoon. The twins were at the kitchen table doing homework with the seriousness only young children can muster. Pencils scattered, juice boxes half empty. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, warm and unhurried. I was folding laundry. Once, that would have felt like wasted time, something to rush through so I could get back to being useful elsewhere. Now, it felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. "Mom," Leo asked suddenly, "do grown-ups ever get scared?" "All the time," I said honestly. "Even when they're doctors?" "Especially then." Isla looked up. "What do they do when they're scared?" I paused, holding one of Leo's socks in my hands. "They learn," I said, "and sometimes they change." That answer seemed to satisfy them. It satisfied me, too. My parents and I found a rhythm that didn't rely on nostalgia or denial. We spoke occasionally, we met for lunch sometimes. They asked before offering opinions. They didn't assume access to my time, my children, or my resources. They were learning, slowly, and that was enough. I no longer measured progress by how much they apologized, but by how much they respected the word no. Maribel visited more often, not out of obligation, out of choice. She talked less about success and more about effort, less about appearances and more about meaning. She struggled, but she owned her struggles now. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, she said, "I used to think you were unbreakable." I smiled softly. "I was just unsupported." She nodded. "I see the difference now." That mattered. At the hospital, I gave a lecture to new interns. The topic wasn't medicine, it was sustainability. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you shouldn't have to prove your worth by exhaustion. A few nodded, one cried quietly in the back row. I stayed after. Arthur's chair in my living room remained where it always had. I didn't move it, not because I was stuck in grief, but because it reminded me of steadiness, of truth spoken calmly, of support given without strings. On the anniversary of his passing, the twins and I planted a tree in the backyard. "Why a tree?" Isla asked. "Because it grows," I said, "and it gives shade." Leo pressed the soil down carefully. "Will it remember him?" I smiled. "In a way." They accepted that. Children understand symbolism instinctively. The biggest change, though, was internal. I no longer rehearsed conversations before having them. I no longer explained my boundaries twice. I no longer feared being misunderstood by people committed to misunderstanding me. I trusted myself. That trust changed everything. One evening, after the twins were asleep, I found an old notebook in a drawer. Inside were lists I'd written years ago, goals, plans, promises. Most of them revolved around responsibility. Very few mentioned joy. I closed the notebook and set it aside. The next morning, I planned a weekend trip for no reason at all. No justification, no emergency. Just because. And that, I realized, was freedom. The family I grew up in taught me how to endure. The family I built taught me how to live. There were still hard days, still moments when old instincts surfaced. Healing isn't erasure, it's awareness. But now, when those moments came, I met them with compassion instead of criticism. I had stopped mistaking self-sacrifice for love, and in doing so, I had changed the inheritance my children would receive. Not money, not perfection, but permission. Permission to be whole, permission to say no, permission to be loved without earning it. And that, more than anything, felt like the ending this story needed. Not closure, continuation.